Hey everyone, thank you very much for watching this video. If you already saw the first video that I uploaded on the channel, I wanna apologize. I know the audio had a lot of problems. Hopefully this one's gonna be better. Again, English is not my first language, so you're gonna have to bear with me. So I'll talk about Jordan Peterson this time. I know I talked about him a little bit on my first video, but this time I think it's necessary to go a little bit more in depth. So let's begin. So if you as me have been following Jordan Peterson for a while, it's more than likely that you too have heard his theory on the causes of the Russian Revolution. As a disclaimer, I want to let it be clear, and with no doubts, that I condemn the atrocities committed by the communists in the Soviet Union. Even though I won't talk much about the Soviet regime, I feel the need to state this so that no one can misinterpret my intentions in this video. So, Jordan Peterson's theory seems to be almost entirely based on the underlying metaphysics of European societies presented in the psychological analysis of Jung and in the social critiques of Dostoevsky and Nietzsche. And as he has presented it multiple times in his lectures, he really believes that Dostoevsky and Nietzsche prophesized the tragedies of the Soviet Union and the Nazi Germany.
It wasn't like a triumphal statement on Nietzsche's part, even though when you hear it quoted, you always hear it quoted that way. It's like it's a sort of victory, God is dead, you know, or something to celebrate. It's not what Nietzsche thought at all. In fact, he thought all hell was going to break loose because of it, and he predicted as much. In the 1870s, I mean, he predicted what was going to happen in the 20th century with ridiculous accuracy. Like, it's uncanny, and that's partly because. This is something absolutely brilliant. It's very difficult for me to believe that it was written so long ago. So, this is Dostoevsky's criticism of communism. 40 years before communism was a political force.
And while there is plenty of wisdom in Nietzsche's work, by no means I think that this can be used as an explanation of said tragedies. I will try to picture his theory without building a straw man. I think it goes like this. So after the Enlightenment, the European societies were possessed by an overcritical sentiment towards the church and the concept of God. Jordan Peterson cites Nietzsche's quote on the death of God and the blood of the nations.
Quote that God is dead. So what Nietzsche said essentially was, God is dead and we have killed him. That's a different idea, and we'll never find enough water to wash away the blood.
So when God is dead, the spiritual vacuum of Europe is filled in by nihilism and Hellenism, and in the absence of the archetypal figure of God as the Father, people seek the Father figure in the state instead. Since the values couldn't be derived from facts and critical thinking, people lack the moral foundation required to withstand the fascists, the Nazis, and the Bolsheviks. Therefore, they were easily seduced and ended up being part of these atrocities.
That these people have been successful. Okay, so now the intellectuals come in and say, property is theft, success is oppression. And then they look for the people in the village who are willing to move against those 20 successful people. Well, those guys at the bottom, those 100 resentful, jealous, murderous people at the bottom, they're just waiting for an opportunity to go kick down some doors. And that's exactly what they did in the 1920s. And as I said, they wiped out all their productive peasants. And then 6 million Ukrainians starved to death.
His idea on the nihilists and the atheists as the main cause of genocidal phenomena is derived from Dostoevsky's social commentary in multiple of his novels. Hence his quotes on Crime and Punishment, for example when he was talking to Matt Dillahunty.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you both for a very interesting and revealing exchange. My question is for you, Dr. Peterson. You alluded to an important distinction between someone who would actually be an atheist and someone who merely professes to be an atheist. You implied that Matt and others are not genuinely atheists. I'm curious why you think that. Is it just because we have sacred values, that everyone has sacred values? What, in your view, would a genuine atheist be like?
He'd be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. Because Dostoevsky, the last thing Dostoevsky ever did was make a straw man out of his opponents, let's say. What Dostoevsky did in all of his great novels was make his enemies, let's say, or make each of the positions that he was trying to contend with as powerful and admirable as he possibly could. And since he was an absolutely spectacular genius, he could really do that. And so Raskolnikov plots a murder. And he murders this horrible woman, who's horrible according to everyone who knows her, who also has enslaved her rather mentally feeble niece, and who does nothing but make people miserable consciously all the time. And he does that in order to save his sister from a rather sophisticated form of prostitution, to save himself from starvation so that he can become a great lawyer and help people. Right? So Dostoevsky sets up the stage. Here is the perfect situation for a murder, and all of the rational choices point in that direction. And Raskolnikov, who's also sort of torturing himself, or sort of tortured because he's sort of hungry and not very well, not thinking very clearly, he undertakes the murder, and he gets away with it. And before he does it, he berates himself in what I would describe as the negative atheistic style.
I found it weird how he mentions how Dostoevsky was in the stillman business when he came to the godless people, since he tried to make their argument as powerful as he could. But that statement couldn't be further from the truth. For someone who puts so much emphasis in how, while reading a complex text, you have to judge the line within the paragraph within the chapter, and the chapter within the narrative of the entire book, I cannot explain myself how he cannot see the repetitive religious biases in the atheist characters of Dostoevsky's novels. They're mostly strawmans used as tools to always feed in his moral arguments. I'm gonna give you a couple examples. If you have read The Brothers Karamazov, you know that Ivan goes insane after he realizes that his atheist rhetoric got his own dad killed by Smerdyakov. So another example is the revolutionary nihilist from The Idiot. The revolutionary nihilist from The Idiot ends up realizing that he had misjudged the prince, and after his critique of the aristocratic class, he ends up in a deathbed having to be aided by the high-class friends of the prince. In reality, if you read Dostoevsky, there are no stillman atheist characters in the novels because he had reached a conclusion before he even started the novel. If God is dead, everything is permissible. Therefore, people become immoral when they start relying on a higher power. So the Soviet Union was not caused by atheist moral relativism. Even if we assume that nihilist sentiment was prevalent in the Russian society, that will get us correlation, not causality. I wonder how he seems to be really aware of how societies revolt when dispossessed people reach a certain point of despair, but when talking about the Soviets, he blames the lack of God. He never mentions the fact that the Tsar Nicholas II made blunder after blunder after blunder, and honestly, he had bad luck like no one else. If this was chess, Nicholas lost both rooks in the Russo-Japanese War, his queen by letting Rasputin get so involved with his family and his political circle, and his knights and bishops during World War I. His opponents, in contrast, were playing with all the pieces. Oh, and let's not forget the Bloody Sunday, when people who still believe the Tsar as someone who could relieve some of their suffering tried to take a petition to the Winter Palace and got massacred by the Imperial Guard and the line infantry. The revolution was imminent in such circumstances. Lenin would have succeeded in taking control over the angry masses regardless of religion or lack thereof. The fact is that the monarchy in Russia was the cause of their own defeat, and it wasn't the lack of religious structure but the huge amounts of expectation that the Tsar had to uphold what made the structure crumble. He implies that people in the bottom didn't revolt because they were poor or oppressed, but because of the meaning of God was taken away from them, and the Marxists filled the void with resentment. Again, this sounds kind of logical at first glance, but the premise is not accurate. There was resentment and anger, but there is no evidence to show that the religious ideals could have prevented the uprising. The same way the Catholic Church could not stop the Mexican Revolution of 1910 from happening, the Russian Orthodox Church and the imperial system couldn't have prevented the Russian Revolution, and they did not. Germany sent Lenin back to Russia knowing that the Tsar's regime had already failed in the eyes of the people. And indeed, they were right. The Tsar had failed them in multiple fronts, sometimes by mere incompetence and sometimes by pure bad luck. By no means I think the Tsar was to blame for what was about to happen, since he was a victim of his awful circumstances. You see, I truly believe that Nicholas had good intentions and he was a person of honor and principles, but the fact is that he was unfit to rule the empire. And that is one of the main flaws of the monarchies, forcing divine destinies into normal human beings. Here's a part of a telegram from the chairman of the State Duma to the Emperor Nicholas II. Quote, Most humbly I report to your majesty that the popular disturbances which have begun in Petrograd are assuming serious character and threatening proportions. The causes are a shortage of baked bread and insufficient supply of flour, which are giving rise to panic, but most of all, a complete lack of confidence in the leadership, which is incapable of leading the nation out of this difficult situation. In such circumstances, there will undoubtedly be an explosion of events, which it may be possible to contain, temporarily at the price of shedding blood of innocent citizens, but which it will be impossible to control if they persist. The movement could spread to the railways, and the life of the country will come to a standstill at such critical time. The factories, which are producing armaments in Petrograd, are coming to a halt due to lack of fuel and raw materials. The workers are without jobs, and hungry unemployed masses being launched on the road to anarchy, elemental and uncontrollable. End of quotes. You can clearly get a picture of what was driving the rest in the Russian society. There is mention of hunger, lack of employment, panic, lack of confidence on the leadership, and never in the entire paragraph there is a mention of a prevalent lack of morality and God. You see, it's really easy to judge the people through the lenses of our comfy times and imply the lack of values, morality, and to reduce their struggle to simple nihilistic revenge. But it's not truthful nor valuable to do so. Just try to imagine being in a situation where you and every person that you love is told to shut up and keep working so that the people in charge can keep fighting a war that hasn't produced anything of value for anyone but hunger, sickness, and death. And when you've seen others try to speak up, all they've gotten is bullets or deaf ears. How much does a society has to suffer before it becomes morally right to fight back, I ask myself. Of course, the future of the uprisings has been different in different instances. I will never make the case that what the Soviets implemented was in any way the same as what the US or France made out of their revolutions. But my point is not about what happens after people decide to fight for a better future, but the road that leads to that point. Peterson's theory about the lack of God and meaning as the driving force behind the Russian Revolution feels really misleading to me, because he seems to blame the Enlightenment rationale for these sentiments, while dismissing the huge political shortcomings of the Russian Empire that explain the mass appeal of Marxism when Lenin comes back to Russia. Even though Dostoevsky and Nietzsche are brilliant thinkers that have shaped our understanding of the moral dilemmas of their times, I invite anyone to be a little bit more skeptical when people quote their work as factual claims for the tragedies of the 20th century. People need to make the distinction between the Russian Revolution before and after it was corrupted by Lenin, and not look at the struggle that opened the door to such a horrible dictatorship as a simple dichotomy of good and evil. There are trends that repeat themselves throughout history, such as the conditions that open doors to revolutionary sentiments, and multiple times the despair, the hunger, and hope for a better future have been way more powerful sentiments than simple nihilism and lack of morality. That's pretty much what I think about that. And don't get me wrong, I like a lot of things that Jordan Peterson says on his lectures, but when he talks about history, he seems to be really reductive. I would like to recommend 3 books that I use for this video to everyone that wants to understand a little bit more about this topic. The first one is The End of Tsarist Russia, The March to World War I and Revolution by Dominic Lieven. I will also recommend The Eastern Front by Norman Stone. And please check A Lifelong Passion. That one contains the letters that were sent between Nicholas and Alexandra Romanov. So thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.